Farmer Millionaire heard noises in the barn, and what he found there changed his life. It was the middle of the night when the sharp creak of wood sliced through the farm's silence. One crack, then another. No big deal if you live out here, unless everything around you is too still, too cold, too quiet. Leandro opened his eyes, but didn't move right away. It could have been the wind or some animal, he thought. But something inside him, an ancient instinct, wouldn't accept that answer. He pulled on his heavy jacket, slipped into his boots and grabbed the flashlight. Outside, the air felt thick and freezing, as if it were warning of something worse than cold. He walked toward the barn with steady steps, heart pounding. It had been ages since anyone set foot in that place. Ever since his wife died, Leandro had kept the property by habit, a wealthy man surrounded by land, but utterly alone in the world. When he swung open the barn door, the flashlight beams swept over scattered hay, dark corners, forgotten tools. And then he saw her. At the far end, half hidden among shadows and straw, a curled-up figure. It was a woman, young, torn clothes, a dirt-streaked face, her eyes half closed in exhaustion. In her arms lay two newborns wrapped in makeshift cloths. Leandro froze. For a second, everything vanished. The cold, the night, the years of isolation. He saw his late wife's belly in an involuntary memory. He smelled the hospital, heard the silence of the empty nursery. The woman tried to move but had no strength. The babies whined softly, their breath ragged. She lifted her head with great effort and murmured, "They're not to blame, they just need to live." Then she fainted. Leandro didn't think twice. He scooped her up in his arms, the babies carefully nestled against her chest, and sprinted back to the house. The weight felt light, but the urgency was as heavy as lead. Inside, he settled the three of them in the guest bedroom. Blankets, a space heater, warm towels, everything done in a rush. He grabbed the phone and called Lucia, the only person he trusted to look after people. She was a retired nurse living just a few miles away. When she heard his voice, she asked no questions. She just said she was on her way. Lucia arrived half an hour later, a medical bag in hand, and a look of alertness in her eyes. When she saw the scene, her eyes widened, but she stayed silent. She began examining the babies, checking their breathing, temperature, vital signs. Then she turned to the woman, took her pulse, and cleaned her minor wounds. The tension in the room was thick, loaded with unspoken questions. Leandro stood in the doorway, watching it all. He didn't know what he felt. Part of him wanted to stay away. Another part, the part he thought had died with his wife, wanted to protect, to comfort, to do something, anything. The night turned into a vigil. Lucia rigged up a makeshift bottle with formula she always kept on hand for emergencies. The babies, though fragile, responded. One of them, the girl, sucked eagerly. The other, quieter, slept with shallow breaths and clenched fists. Camilla, he still didn't know her name, didn't wake until dawn. Leandro, sitting on the living room couch, waited, his face buried in his hands, his head throbbing with thoughts. Who was this woman? Where had she come from? And why did that desperate plea, "They just need to live," echo so closely to the pain he carried? There were no answers, only one certainty. She hadn't shown up by accident, and neither, after everything, could he go on as if nothing had happened. Camilla woke as if emerging from a nightmare still in progress. The room felt strange, the ceiling unfamiliar. The babies were there, one in each makeshift crib, sleeping. Her body ached in places she couldn't even pinpoint. She tried to sit up, but her legs gave out. Her head throbbed, her throat was parched. That's when she saw the man, standing in the doorway, arms crossed, expression hard. Tall, stubbled, eyes hollow as someone who's known too much pain. Leandro. She didn't know his name, but she felt the weight of his presence. "Take it easy, you're safe," he said, his deep voice making no effort to sound gentle. She shrank back instinctively, eyes wide. She searched for her children. When she spotted them, She felt some relief, but she didn't relax. "Where am I?" she whispered. "In my house. You were in the barn with the babies. You almost passed out. I brought you in and called a nurse. You're okay?" "For now." Camilla didn't answer. Tension filled the room. Leandro felt that one more word might make her bolt right then and there, barefoot into the wild, so he stepped back slowly. Lucia entered shortly after, softer, more human. With patience and kindness, Lucia brought warm tea, cleaned Camilla's scratches and bruises again, and spoke in a low voice. Camilla barely spoke, just enough. She said she needed to rest, that she couldn't leave yet. She also said curtly that the babies weren't to blame for anything and that all she wanted was to keep them alive, nothing more. She didn't say where she'd come from or where she was headed. Over the next few days, Leandro kept his distance. He watched from afar. Camilla scarcely left the room. She fed the babies, napped between feedings, and avoided any approach. When their paths crossed in the hallway, she looked away. But gradually, something began to change. It started when she asked for more powdered formula, then when she allowed Lucia to examine the babies more thoroughly. Later, when she ventured onto the porch with both of them in her arms to get some sun, Leandro noticed, and without saying a word, began rearranging the house around them. He fixed the heater in the bedroom, swapped the sheets for softer ones, ordered diapers and baby clothes online, all without uttering a single sentence. It was his way of taking care, without intruding, without demanding. One afternoon, while Camilla burped the baby on her shoulder, she saw Leandro feeding the horses in the distance. He glanced back for a moment. Their eyes met. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away. Leandro took it as a sign. Small, but real. Day by day, the house ceased being just shelter. It became a place of resistance, against fear, against trauma, against the past. Their silence stopped feeling empty. It felt protective. A tacit agreement. You don't ask questions, I don't run away. At least, not yet. Camilla remained tense, ready to flee at any sign of danger. But there, in that unlikely corner in the middle of nowhere, she began to feel that perhaps, just maybe, she wasn't alone anymore. And Leandro, though he wouldn't admit it, felt something shifting inside him too. The atmosphere on the farm was changing. Mornings no longer felt so heavy, and the silence that once suffocated now soothed. Camilla still spoke little, but she walked the house with more confidence. She fed the babies on schedule, folded their tiny clothes with near-ritual care. Leandro watched from afar, respectful yet increasingly invested. It was Lucia who noticed first. The boy was quieter than usual, feverish, shallow breaths, 2 soft cries. When she picked him up, her brow furrowed. "He's burning up, way too hot." Pale, Camilla moved closer. Maternal instinct kicked in. She placed a hand on her son's forehead and trembled. Despair washed over her. He just can't." Leandro didn't hesitate. He grabbed the car keys and nodded to Lucia to get ready, but she held his arm. "It's not critical enough for the hospital yet. Let's try to manage it here. He's too small for a full admittance." Leandro agreed, but his face was gone. His calm vanished. He spent the night awake, laying damp cloths on the baby's forehead, checking his breath, pacing circles in the room. The boy cried softly, as if each whimper cost him a lifetime of effort. Camilla sat in the corner, knees drawn to her chest. She looked petrified, like she'd been plunged back into some dark place inside her own mind. She only reacted with her gaze. In the dead of night, while she rocked the baby in her arms, Leandro spoke to him for the first time as if he were already his own. "Hang in there, little guy. You're here now, you're safe." The baby coughed faintly. Leandro squeezed his eyes shut. There was something in that cry, not the sound itself, but the vulnerability that shattered him inside. as if he were reliving a grief he'd never fully buried. He turned to Camilla. She was trembling. The words came almost as a whisper. "What's his name?" For a moment she didn't answer. Then, eyes welling, she met his gaze. "Tiago." Time stopped. Leandro froze. The name echoed inside him like a muffled thunderclap. Tiago. The name he and his wife had chosen for their son. The name never spoken. The name etched in his memory as both promise and grief. He rose slowly, as if the air had grown thicker. He left the room and closed the door behind him gently. On the porch, he let himself collapse into the wooden chair. His chest hurt like it hadn't in years. For the first time in a long while, he wept openly. No shouting, no drama, but utterly devastating. Inside, Camilla sensed it. She didn't hear it, but she felt it, and for the first time, the barrier between them showed a genuine crack. The next day, Tiago improved. The fever broke. His cries grew stronger. Lucia smiled, relieved. Camilla kissed his forehead and cried silently. Leandro didn't comment on the name. There was no need, but he began to act differently. He held Tiago more confidently, spoke to him as he carried out chores, and for the first time, called him by name. Camilla watched it all, still frightened, still wary, but something inside her was starting to shift, and Leandro, unable to explain why, felt he was standing before a second chance, not to relive the past, but to honor it by caring for what could still be saved. Camilla began to change. Not all at once, but in small gestures. She no longer flinched at footsteps in the hallway. She started asking for simple things: diapers, more formula, clean towels. The kind of requests you only make once you've started to accept you're going to stay. Leandro noticed everything. He remained silent, never pushing. He just made whatever was needed, as if the house already belonged, at least in part, to the four of them. A silent agreement held their days together. She'd care for the babies, he'd handle everything else. But there was tension in the air, as if something was always about to happen. One night, under a light rain, Camilla broke the pattern. She didn't ask for help. She didn't explain. She just came into the living room and spoke. She said she'd worked as a nanny in a wealthy household, that her employer had been pregnant with twins and died in childbirth, that the husband, Lorenzo, had changed completely after the loss. She made it clear he didn't want the boy, only the girl. She overheard a conversation between him and a lawyer, plans, things no one should ever know. "The boy is disposable," she said. That was her breaking point. She fled. No time, no plan, just her and the two babies. She told it all at once, her voice flat, like someone repeating a trauma she'd already cried through. Leandro listened quietly. Only his eyes changed. Not in shock, not in doubt, but in recognition. He knew what it was to lose someone you'd never had the chance to protect. After that, he bolstered the farm's security, installed cameras, locked down every entrance, reactivated the electronic gate he hadn't used in years. No one would get in there without going through him, Camilla noticed. She said nothing. But that day, when she handed Tiago to Leandro, she didn't hesitate for the first time. It wasn't trust yet. It was something more primal, a shared survival instinct. Now they knew that what bound them wasn't just chance. It was the threat of the world outside. And within that house, everything began to align around a simple truth. These two babies would not endure what the adults had lived through, not while they still drew breath. Trust had grown, but Camilla still carried something she wouldn't share. She walked more steadily, slept more soundly, but her eyes still bore their scars. Leandro noticed, but he didn't ask. He knew that when the time came, she would speak. And the time came, without warning. It was late afternoon. The babies were sleeping. The house was silent. Camilla sat on the nursery floor, motionless, holding Tiago. Leandro passed down the hall, and the moment he crossed the threshold, he knew something had changed. She wasn't crying, she wasn't trembling, but the air around her felt frozen. The truth hit like a clean cut. There was no backstory, no justification, just the bare fact. Tiago was the son of the man she'd been running from, a long-ago abuse hidden behind fear and shame. The children's father wasn't just a danger, he was the source of her trauma. She held in her arms the living proof of what she'd suffered, and yet she'd chosen to protect him, love him, keep him alive. The woman many would call a kidnapper was, in fact, a survivor. And the baby the father had tried to erase from the world was the one she'd decided to save, even if it cost her freedom, her peace, her life. Leandro heard it all without interrupting. What he felt was a punch to the chest, a mix of anger, helplessness, and profound respect. Not for the secret he'd been told, but for finally understanding the weight she carried. After that day, their dynamic shifted forever. Camilla no longer moved in fear. She no longer shrank away. There was still pain, yes, but there was also courage. And Leandro, for the first time in a long while, found himself driven not only by the past, but by something new, the responsibility to protect someone who should never have been left so vulnerable. The days had been steady. The house ran in silence to the rhythm of the babies. Camilla and Leandro had found a kind of balance, a quiet pact of care and watchfulness. But that couldn't last forever, and it didn't. The news came without fanfare, like the warnings that really matter. A black car pulled up at the farm gate, license plates from the capital, a man in a suit carrying a briefcase, a lawyer. He said he represented Lorenzo, that Camilla was wanted, that there was suspicion of kidnapping. Leandro listened without changing his tone, but his eyes said everything. He asked for paperwork. There was no warrant, just a thinly veiled threat disguised as polite conversation. Leandro sent him away. Gate closed, perimeter locked down, all eyes on guard. But the message was clear. Lorenzo knew where she was. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the house changed. Camilla avoided windows, slept barely any. Leandro called his lawyer, Marcos, a longtime family friend, discreet and efficient. He asked Marcos to dig into everything, birth records, legal ties, possible angles. When Lorenzo showed up in person, there was no shouting, no scene, just contained tension. He looked sharp, well-dressed, flanked by another lawyer. He demanded the babies. He spoke as if he had a right to them. Camilla didn't move. For a moment, it looked like she might back down. But then she stepped forward. She spoke in a clear, steady voice. She told them everything about the abuse, the pregnancy, the escape, the threats. She spoke in front of Marcos, in front of Lorenzo's lawyer, in front of Leandro, with clarity, without hesitation. Lorenzo tried to argue, but the control was gone. Embarrassment took over. His lawyer fell silent. The truth had been laid bare in front of witnesses. Leandro stepped up. He said he wouldn't hand over a single child without a court order, and that he was the one filing suit now. That same day, Marcos filed for provisional custody and lodged a formal complaint. He submitted what they had: medical reports, Lorenzo's wife's death certificate, messages from Camilla's phone, hospital records. He also requested DNA tests to confirm what Camilla had said. The next days were a tense wait, but when the results came back, there was no longer any doubt. Leah and Tiago shared the same mother and different fathers. The proof that sealed Camilla's story as true. Lorenzo skipped the preliminary hearing. His lawyer dropped the case. The judge granted provisional custody to Camilla, citing serious signs of violence and risk to the children. Leandro was there, sitting beside her, not as guardian or savior, but as someone who chose to be. Camilla cried for the first time, without hiding it. Not out of fear, but relief. The danger now had a name, a face, and actual power, but it also had a lawsuit, a formal complaint, and legal boundaries. For the first time, she wasn't facing it alone. The case was still in progress. The evidence was in the court's hands. Provisional custody was now official, but what really mattered wasn't on paper. It was the way Camilla started walking through the house, upright, at ease, the faint sound of piano once a day when the babies slept, the smell of cake baking in the late afternoon, and the timid but whole smiles that began to appear. Birth certificates were reissued, now in her name. No child would ever be called motherless or nobody's child again. Leah and Tiago existed with identity, history, and protection. They had last names, they had futures. Camila and Leandro never talked about what they were. They didn't need to. They shared chores. They traded glances. One cared while the other slept. One tended the herb garden while the other soothed a crying baby. No rings on fingers, no vows spoken aloud, just presence. The house, once silent and still, was alive now. There were laughs, aromas, routines. There were midnight cries, spilled bottles, diapers on the line. There was life where once there'd only been memories, and yet it was still fragile. Camilla hadn't forgotten, neither had Leandro. Each carried their own ghosts, but now they both knew. They didn't have to face them alone. Time passed slowly. There was no rush. The world outside remained the same, full of noise, judgment, cruelty disguised as order. But inside, the rules were different. Then, on an ordinary afternoon, the rain came. Not the storm of before. This was a gentle rain, almost shy, the kind that doesn't scare you, just wraps you up. Camilla sat on the porch with Tiago in her arms. Leandro came up behind her with Leah. They sat together, saying nothing. The four of them stayed there, watching the soft rain kiss the earth, breathing in the scent of wet grass. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was rest. It was peace. There was no Hollywood romance here. There was real care. There was rebuilding. There were choices made every single day, even when they were tired, even when they were scared. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was survival turned into home. And above all, there was a truth that needed no words. Not every family is born of blood. Some are born of the courage to keep going when everything seems lost. And that's how that house, once defined by absence, became a place of new beginnings. Not to forget the past, but to no longer be imprisoned by it. If this story touched something inside you, tell me in the comments, what does home mean to you? Like and subscribe. It helps more stories like this reach those who need to hear them. Thanks for being here.